Hello and welcome to this week's Opening Bell. I'm boxing news editor Tris Dixon, joined by Matt Christie. Matt, enjoyed your podcast with John last week. Thought it went down really well, and thought John was an able assistant. Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it. John seemed to enjoy it even more. He seemed to warm to the task. But yeah, it's good.
He's sort of broken his podcast duck now. He's broken his Opening Bell duck, which is good. So here we are, Thursday morning, and there's been big news overnight.
Yeah.
With the story that I think was broken by Jeff Powell at the Daily Mail that Amir Khan will fight Floyd Mayweather on May the 3rd in 2014. Now, before we take this story too much further, got an email from Khan's team overnight saying that, basically denying that that's the case and saying that they're still in San Francisco training for a fight in December, alluding to the fact that obviously Devin Alexander is still the front runner for that December 7th date. What do you make of it all?
It's all a bit confusing. Zab Judah was mentioned, wasn't he, as the new opponent for Alexander. I suspect that there's some talks have gone on between. It's no secret that Mayweather wants Khan. Khan obviously wants that fight as well. I don't think it'd be that difficult to sell, but at the same time, I think you're really, really hard pressed to say that Khan deserves that fight. And deep down, does he believe that he's going to win that fight with what's going on? But we've had this so many times before. There'll be a denial, and then it wouldn't surprise me if I was to walk in tomorrow and it would be confirmed that Mayweather was fighting Khan on May the 3rd.
There's a lot going against that fight in terms of boxing fans, but I think the wider public really want to see it. A, because a lot of the wider public seem to want Amir Khan to lose, and secondly, because it's two names that people are familiar with,
Yeah.
and so they want that. Khan Mayweather, for me, I think there's a few stumbling blocks that need to be cleared first and foremost. First, if Amir takes that fight in May, he would have been out the ring for more than a year, which I think is too long. It's very rare that Mayweather's more active than his opponent.
Yeah.
But that would probably be the case. I also think Khan's got one fight left on the deal with Box Nation, and do the Khan team want that fight on Box Nation, or would they want it on Sky Box Office, which obviously has a history of getting massive numbers in on big pay-per-view fights with Mayweather? And with regards to Khan too, I mean, the guy hasn't even fought a welterweight, and he'd be fighting the light middleweight champion of the world.
Yeah, no, they're all really good points. The other side of it as well is, if there is a possibility that he's going to fight Mayweather, and it will happen irrespective of whether he fights Alexander or not, I can certainly see the logic in them going for that fight with Mayweather, because it's a fight that he may never get the opportunity for again. If Mayweather fights somebody else in May, the fight against Alexander is no gimme. I'm not even sure I'd pick Khan to beat Alexander, to be quite honest.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why that fight's looking more and more unlikely, because so many people think that's a really legitimate 50-50 fight if they're not siding with Alexander.
Yeah.
Who seemed, when I spoke to him recently in Vegas during the week that was the one, I think it was on the Wednesday I spoke to him. He was extremely bullish about his chances of Khan. He's got he actually thinks as soon as he hits Khan, basically the guy's going to go.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think about that Alexander fight, it's such a massive risk, such a big hurdle to clear. At the same time, though, I think if Khan wins that fight and wins well, it legitimizes the Mayweather fight.
I think Sorry, go on.
More than anything else he's done to date.
I think it does, and I think it goes back to what you say. It legitimises it in the eyes of perhaps the hardcore fans. But I was explaining it to someone this morning, and you could kind of seduce the sporting public that don't know boxing as well. Like you said, they'll know Floyd Mayweather and they'll know Amir Khan. And you could sell that fight.
Well, yeah, between them they've got sort of 5.5 million followers on Twitter, I think.
Yeah,
which is, I think I might be wrong, but in terms of active boxers, I think they're the two most followed boxers who are currently fighting.
Yeah.
Tyson's up there near Mayweather, but obviously Tyson's long since retired. Interviewing Mike Tyson tonight, by the way.
That's really what time?
It's going to be 5:30 our time. 5:50 our time, actually. It just got bumped back 20 minutes. So that's for our Boxing News Annual, which is a bit of a Mike Tyson special.
Yeah.
I digress.
But no, the annual's really taking shape, though. It's fascinating for me, kind of going back over the Mike Tyson stuff. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I think it's a real good centrepiece for the magazine this year, and I also think that the new features we've got coming in are really good. But with regards to going back to Khan Mayweather, I just think, like we said, they're two massively followed people. There will be a massive amount of hype. You can see HBO's 24/7, or in this case it'll be Showtime's All Access, really getting their teeth into it as well. I think with Khan they've got a fresh character to follow who's got his own issues and had his own stories both inside and outside the ring of late, which I'm sure Mayweather would love to play up as well. I can see Mayweather getting stuck right into some of the stuff that's been going on in the newspapers about Amir, and it makes money sense because Amir is a big name in America, and I mean, I know I keep going back to it, but at the one, right, during that week, no, when all the fighters went up on stage for the weigh-in, and they were getting all the Golden Boy and the Mayweather, the TMT fighters up on stage.
Were you at the weigh-in?
Yeah,
Was
funnily
you?
enough, yeah,
Right,
great
okay.
atmosphere. Never seen
Many
anything
people
like
there?
12,200. You know what? They even had to shut the doors 2 hours.
No, I don't believe
anyway,
it. I don't believe
but
you.
Khan was booed, right? He received the second loudest ovation, if you will, response probably is best, behind Adrian Broner. And I mean, Khan is relevant, and that's what Mayweather likes. He likes people's relevance, and the audience was polite and respectful to all the other fighters, but Khan provoked a response. And I think that's another selling point. That's a big selling point. And we've spoken, and I've covered it in the column. Well, if it isn't going to be Khan, who is it? One of the things that interested me this morning actually is on the early show on Talk Sport, I listened to them saying, and I think Jeff Powell quoted this in his piece, that it's going to be a £200 million fight or $200 million fight. I'm not sure when you go above 100 million, it's all much of a muchness. And they're saying that they were sort of gobsmacked that Khan might only be making $6 million for it. And I mean, obviously that would rise on pay-per-view to maybe even double that. But $6 million for fighting Floyd Mayweather, that, so big deal. If they think he's only getting $6 million, they don't know what he'd be making up without Floyd Mayweather, which would be about $1 million, maybe $1.5 million. Mayweather's the guy who sells. Basically, you can have Mayweather against fighter A, fighter B, fighter C, fighter D, and they'll all make the same basic wage. Obviously, that their performance at the box office would alter that basic amount, but the flat line would be the same for any of those guys now that Mayweather fights, whether it's Garcia, whether it's Khan, whoever it is. I can't see anyone making more than, and the amount they make for fighting Mayweather would be obscenely more than they make for fighting anyone else.
Yeah, would you give Khan a chance?
No, I wouldn't at all. I wouldn't.
Would you have done? Would you have done?
That said,
would it have done 18 months or before the Lamont Peterson fight?
I would have been perhaps more interested in it, but
Yeah.
also, I mean, I'm still concerned about the whole weight thing.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not forget Amir, who had his last fight at catchweight against Julio Diaz, and who insists he was moving up anyway, hasn't fought as a welterweight, and Mayweather's just cleaned out the light middleweight division of its best fighter. So I mean, there's that whole thing to throw into the mix too. What I'm interested in, and it's something I saw Stephen Espinoza from Showtime say. I'm speaking to him later too, by the way. But it's something that does interest me about this fight is we've seen Mayweather fight the stocky punchers, the brawlers, the guys with the body attacks and all the rest of it. Style-wise, the Khan matchup offers something different.
Yeah, completely.
You've got someone who's exciting, who bombs forward, who raids in and out, and who, for hand speed, probably matches Mayweather. And that it's something different to watch, isn't it? You're not watching the same old thing.
Yeah.
And Khan's fights are exciting as well. You can't deny that. And Khan, and Mayweather's not a concussive puncher. Obviously, Victor Ortiz might disagree, but Mayweather's not a concussive puncher. So Khan, you think, is the danger for Khan is against massive punchers. So there's different things that you can factor in to make it more interesting, to make it hang in the balance, and to provide a different sell to the other sort of Mayweather fights that we've had.
Yeah, I can see that, and I agree with all that. But you just mentioned everything. The only thing really where you'd say is comparable with Mayweather is hand speed, arguably power, but we haven't really seen that at the higher weight, as you've said before. I can see why it would sell. I don't, but it's Mayweather surely would be a massive favourite, and I could also understand why a few disgruntled fans are saying, well, what on earth has he done to deserve it? I mean,
we talk about prices sometimes.
Yeah.
In your mind, in your heart of hearts, price up a Khan Mayweather fight now.
5-1 favourite Mayweather.
So what would you have Khan as an underdog?
Well, 5-1 against, 5 or 6-1 against. Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if you could get odds on about 8-1 for Khan.
Maybe.
But we'll see. Still, that's really. I mean, it's going to be fascinating to follow that story. Like you said, we'll get these things where it's denied. Both camps deny it, then they'll mention a few other names. Then next thing you know, before you know, it's all signed, sealed, and delivered, and flights on.
Yeah, exactly.
So, looking at flights now, actually, I've started to look at flights now because, like you say, these things are often just happen just out of nowhere, just when they seem to be quietening down. So, this weekend is a really big weekend of action. Loads of good stuff. I think Paul Wheeler's got the plum job going out to Moscow to watch the best heavyweight in the world, Vladimir Klitschko, fight Alexander Povetkin. Our appetite should have been whetted for this last week when Hay and Fury should have. We should be discussing that fight now.
We should, yeah.
But as it is, we've had enough of that fight for now. So let's put it on the back burner for 4 months. Klitschko Povetkin, interested?
I am interested. I would have liked to have seen it happen a few years ago. I remember Povetkin beat, I think it was Chris Bird, which seems like not a life. Yeah, I was going to say not quite a lifetime ago, but it was 6 years ago. Was it 2007 when he beat Chris Bird and he pummeled him, and there was an impressive result after that. I thought he handled Eddie Chambers quite handily. Maybe a short time after that fight. And he looked like the leading heavyweight contender. I know Teddy Atlas wasn't keen, and Teddy Atlas, a perfectionist, he wanted Povetkin to be absolutely, Povetkin wasn't quite where Atlas wanted him to be. I think perhaps with hindsight, perhaps this time next week, Povetkin and his team will say, well, maybe we should have gone for that fight a little bit sooner, because Povetkin has shown signs that he's not quite the force that he was, and I think that affects this fight's appeal for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at anyone who really struggles with a blown-up cruiserweight like Marco Huck, as good a fight as it was, pitch him in with Vladimir Klitschko, who's been so dominant, who we've seen shots of this week, who seems as motivated as ever and in fabulous condition, against Povetkin, who's never been in fantastic condition, and who's toiled in recent times. And like you say, you mentioned the Bird fight and you mentioned the Eddie Chambers fights. They do seem like a long time ago, and a bit of that buzz has gone. The interesting, I think, a couple of things that stand out from this fight is Povetkin's clearly, rightly or wrongly, the number 3 heavyweight in the world, behind the brothers. And secondly, he is bringing this WBA belt back to the table, which was ridiculously taken from Vladimir after he won it from David Hay. But I think it's another way to get the brothers belted up. And obviously, we've seen recently with these ridiculous scorecards, which we can go into a little bit more later on. We've seen this fight's in Russia. There is an element of a gamble here, isn't there, with Vladimir being in Russia?
There is an element of a gamble. I don't know. I think even back when the fight would have had appeal, and I still think Povetkin's style is it's almost made for the way that Vlad fights. And I remember Teddy Atlas saying a few years ago, well, look, Povetkin, he needs more head movement. He needs this. He needs that. He hasn't got that now. That didn't develop. It may have been developing under Teddy. I'm not sure, but it's certainly not there now. And there's nothing that makes me think that Povetkin will score the upset this weekend. I'm really, really struggling for it. Unless Klitschko suddenly gets old. From the pictures we've seen, he looks like a beast. People in the team have spoke to Jonathan Banks. by all accounts, and of course we're not going to get told otherwise, but by all accounts, Klitschko is still hungry. He's still there or thereabouts at his peak. And although Povetkin is probably the best available challenger or the most deserving challenger, I think we're going to see again the gulf between Klitschko and the rest.
I think Vlad jabs, discourages him, breaks him down for a stoppage in about 8 or 9 rounds. Danny Flexen's done a brilliant preview in the magazine this week. There is a wild card element to the night, and that's with our old friend Derek Chisora.
Oh God!
Who might be in supervising Vladimir's hands getting wrapped. What do you make of that story?
Well, that's Derek Chisora. I'm sure when he heard about that opportunity, absolutely loved it. I'm sure if that goes ahead, he'll thrive. He'll make a bit of a nuisance of himself. I don't think that Chisora would be distasteful or anything like that, or get up to anything that would potentially damage a future shot at Klitschko if that's what he's looking at. It's an interesting twist, isn't it? It's an interesting twist, and that Chisora loves an interesting twist.
I remember in New York, I think for Cotto Margarito 2, there was a lot of stuff backstage that night, and it sort of was fed through to press row that Cotto had Nazim Richardson go to check Margarito's hands being wrapped.
Yeah.
After Nazim was the guy who sort of stumbled across those tainted wraps before the Margarito Mosley fight. I mean, so mind games like this do happen, don't they? And I mean, whether it affected Margarito on the night, who knows? Because obviously he was roundly busted up and had his eye closed by Cotto. But like you say, it's another thing to factor into the equation. I think, as I put in the column this week, I think it's great being a ringside for a big heavyweight fight like this, but I think if I could be anywhere on Saturday night, it could be, without wanting to sound dodgy, Vladimir's changing room to see what happens when Chisora is there inspecting the wraps and all the rest of it, and seeing if he is making a nuisance of himself.
Yeah, it's amusing. I don't know what Chisora could do that would really rattle Klitschko to the point that it affects his performance against Povetkin. I'm not sure. I think Klitschko, mentally strong, as he's proven time and time again over the last 10 years. And I think I don't think we'll see any evidence of Chisora's presence in Klitschko's performance.
Okay, so it's a big weekend of fights coming up this weekend. There's a couple of other bills that I want to just discuss. We'll keep it a little bit briefer, but Scott Quigg now headlines at the O2 against Cuban Yoandres Salinas, little-known Cuban. We don't know a great deal about him, other than we know that you get a certain type of fighter from Cuba. And obviously Quigg looks ready. I think what's been difficult for Quigg is, and for his trainer Joe Gallagher, has been the last 14 days must have been a bit of an emotional roller coaster. Obviously they were on the hay bill and they were primed to be 100% for that fight, and obviously they were on the weight and the diet was ready, and then they had another 7 days, so it must be very difficult to know what to do, how to do it, to maintain the weight, and also to sort of there would have been time on the Saturday when after the news of the hay cut came out, when they wouldn't have known for sure if they were still fighting.
Yeah, I think credit to Eddie Hearn for that. And I mean, he kind of turned it around quite quickly and got it confirmed with Scott in mind, and he got it confirmed so that there wasn't too much limbo time where they didn't know what was going on. Credit to Joe Gallagher for getting Scott in the gym fairly quickly after that announcement, saying, right, let's just keep doing what we're doing. But yeah, of course, it's not ideal, because ultimately, from when they began training camp, they were training and they had an end date in mind. When that end date changed, however short the discrepancy is, it's still going to disrupt the training somewhat. So yeah, we'll see. But I don't think he's going to have a huge outcome on Scott Quigg. Had it been a month or something like that, then perhaps. But I think in this space of time, Scott Quigg and Joe Gallagher would have been professional enough to do what was needed to do to retain the focus.
With some fighters, there's a slight air of destiny that they are going to be world champions. Have you felt that with Scott Quigg, watching him coming up?
I've always been really, really impressed with Scott Quigg. Always really impressed with him. As a boxer, the way he goes about his business, I think in last week's issue, kind of reading in Don McRae's feature, in that he's almost teaching himself to be bored and trying to put up with these kind of situations that you have to when you're at this level in professional boxing. It shows that he eats, and he really, really does. He believes in this. I didn't think he's had a sense of he's definitely going to make it like I've had with other fighters. But Quigg for me has been the best young British fighter has been the best young British fighter for probably the last 3 or 4 years that I've seen.
William Hill, sponsors of the Opening Bell podcast. Bet £25 and get a £25 bet free.
Okay, that's interesting. There's another young gun on the undercard who, in many ways, is the main event in his own right, and that's because it's the debut of Olympic super heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua. They've brought in Emmanuel Leo, the Italian, who's 8-0 for Joshua's debut. Impressive stats. Maybe not the best fighter, but obviously you can't go pitching him with world-class fighters straight away. It's not. That's Lomachenko's time next week. But Joshua, I mean, the thing about Joshua is seeing how he copes with the pressure, because there's so much expectation on heavyweight gold medalists in particular, isn't there?
There really is, yeah. I'm impressed with the way Joshua carries himself outside the ring. I think Joshua, and perhaps I'm being unfair, was perhaps slightly fortunate to get that gold medal last year. There's a few decisions along the way and in the final that could have gone against him. But the way he's dedicated himself to boxing, I think, as I was saying to John last week, the most encouraging thing about Joshua for me is how rapidly he improves. If he can continue to improve at that rate, then we've got a very, very promising heavyweight on our hands. But I do think Matchroom would be wise to build him steadily. He doesn't look like the finished article at all to me at the moment. No,
okay, that's fair to say. Talking of finished articles, Miguel Cotto is
nice link
in action.
Nice
seamless one might say. He's in action in Florida against Delvin Rodriguez, topping the bill, looking for a big fight, which would be the outcome. If he gets by Rodriguez, he's going to be back in there, and his name will be mentioned, like it or not, with your Mayweathers, with your Alvarez's in particular, and other big fights out there. He's lost 2 in a row, and when I say finished article, the emphasis is on the word, unfortunately, because I think Cotto's most people's favourite fighter and has been for the last 5 years. The emphasis is on the word finished. Cotto gave Mayweather a far better fight than I thought he would, and then maybe perhaps looked a little bit demotivated against Austin Trout, and slipped up against Trout, who might have caught Cotto at the right time. So,
boom,
I mean, it's hard to know with Cotto, isn't it? I mean, what's left? Whether Trout was a bad night at the office, whether Mayweather was his final big night, it's so hard to know. But Delvin Rodriguez is a fair opponent and should give us some answers, because Rodriguez, we know what he's like against the big guns.
Yeah, Rodriguez, very, very, very solid kind of fringe contender type. I've enjoyed watching him. I remember when Rodriguez was first, being touted. He was a prospect on the way up. People even comparing him to Oscar De La Hoya. He kind of lost his way a bit, but kind of solidified his standing as a legitimate contender. Cotto, I mean, people have been writing Cotto off since the first Margarito fight, since he took that punishing loss. Then he came back, didn't look overly convincing against the likes of Joshua Clottey, but he rebuilt at light middleweight. So this isn't the first time he's kind of been facing this kind of crossroads contest. On paper, I believe he should be far too strong for Rodriguez, but also this, to me, is a banana skin that could send him skidding straight to the end of his career. It really is.
A couple of interesting stats. We talk about Cotto and how he's been around a long time. He's actually a year younger than Rodriguez. 21 world title fights for Cotto. Good stat here on our tailor tape. 2 world title fights for Rodriguez. So, I mean, it shows a gap in class and experience, but like you say, that's also a lot of miles on the clock. 21 world title fights for Miguel Cotto.
Yeah, it's huge, and there's
and there've been some bruising fights.
Exactly, a fair few of those have been absolutely bruising fights. Rodriguez, though, when you mentioned there that he's actually older than Cotto, he's been through some pretty vicious wars himself at a lower level.
Yeah, those Pavel Wallach fights spring to mind. Certainly the first one.
Yeah, and he's not always. I think the thing going for Cotto here is that Rodriguez isn't that slippery. He's not that hard to hit. So that could play into Cotto's hands, but Cotto is definitely a yard slower, and sometimes that's all it takes to start slipping down the rankings. I think it really is. This could be his final crossroads fight.
It is. I mean, it's a phrase often used, and I don't particularly like it, but it's crossroads for Cotto.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
yeah, definitely.
Make or break, really. On a somber note, I know we've ended a few podcasts on a somber note recently, so let me put this in here so that we don't end on a low. On Tuesday, I went to the funeral of Frank Warren's matchmaker Dean Powell, who was a real British boxing stalwart. People in the fight trade turned out en masse. There had to be around 500 people there. Stars, journeymen, promoters, trainers, managers, prospects, pros, amateurs, journalists. It's hard to see who in British boxing did not have any kind of relationship with Dean Powell. He was known by everyone. His loss has affected everyone, and I thought that those who spoke, including Mickey Cantwell, Frank Warren, Jim Rosenthal, and some close friends of Dean, did an exceptional job with the eulogies. It was an emotional day. It was a long service, and it's hard to call it a good send-off, but it was a fitting send-off for someone who was so highly thought of in boxing. I have written about the funeral on the website, which I think is the only account I've seen of it anywhere, which is surprising given the amount of coverage Dean's passings had, and also who was there. But it's a few words really, just summing up what happened and how it went, and it was a very fitting occasion to say goodbye to one of British boxing stalwarts. And I think what came out of it actually for me, Matt, was we obviously knew Dean fairly well, to speak with in a business sense, but his generosity and thoughtfulness with his friends was quite staggering really, and no wonder his passing has had such a severe effect on so many people. So on a slightly more positive note, and it's not often we say positive note with Chavez, not unless there's a drug test involved. But Julio Cesar Chavez was back in action last week, and goodness me, was it controversial yet again. Chavez, I mean, how many more chances is this guy going to get in the sport?
I don't know. I've kind of lost a lot of interest, a lot of respect for Julio Cesar Chavez. I'm not necessarily saying... I'm not going to blame the controversial scorecards on his... I mean, I'm going to put the blame on his shoulders. But in the lead up to the fight, you know, with the whole, oh no, well, okay, yeah, we'll make this £162. Well, no, actually, it'll be 160, whatever. No, it's going to be 170. No, we don't know what he's going to weigh. It was just all a bit stupid, and it was unprofessional. And, you know, I mean, clearly Vera came in at a higher weight as well. But the way, and Chavez, he's just, for me, he's used up all of his lives to be taken seriously in the sport. And outside of Mexico, I would say he's perhaps the most unpopular fighter in the world for these reasons.
I think it's you know, if there was a blanket governing organisation in boxing, it would be time for them to wash their hands off this kid. I think Chavez somehow, despite, and the story's on our website, despite 59 press scores, or in 59 press scores, how many went for Chavez to win?
Not one.
Not one felt he'd done it, but he somehow had his hand raised. And then there was the fast, as you said, with the weight, where he basically weighs what he wants, does what he wants, shows up when he wants. And I just think it's terrible. And you think of how many fighters come up the hard way and really toil and struggle. And Chavez seems to get all these golden opportunities and does his best to mess them all up. And I mean, Chavez, the thing is with Chavez is just when you think he hasn't got it, he does something spectacular. And it sort of almost gives you a new found faith into Chavez, but just over the years he's had so many opportunities to take the sport seriously, to follow in his father's illustrious footsteps. Although obviously that's a daunting job in itself, and credit for him for doing what he's done in the ring to that end. I mean, like that 12th round of the Martinez fight was one of the most sensational things I've seen.
Yeah, it was.
And yet, now that's a distant memory because he's screwed up so many times in the interim.
It really. I mean, I used to have a lot of sympathy for Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. This is a few years ago now. I thought that he was being unfairly criticised because he was living off his father's name. I felt it's very hard to follow in a famous family member's footsteps, be it your father, be it your brother, be it whoever. It's very, very hard to do that. Julio Cesar Chavez tried to do that. He was certainly afforded opportunities that wouldn't have been afforded to other fighters. And then there was almost a period at middleweight where he started to look like he was going to develop into a pretty mean, pretty fearsome fighter. And before the Sergio Martinez fight, there were a few people tipping him for the upset and thinking it was going to be far more competitive than it actually was, bar that final 12th round. But things that have come out since, and you look at his behaviour, and exactly what you say, it's hard to be sympathetic with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr.
Be interested to see what happens if he does go back to Freddie Roach. In the Martinez build-up, there was all the sorts of things about him leaving Freddie waiting around and wanting to train at all hours, which, it's just not the way a fighter can work, is it?
No, it isn't. And you hear fighters that do that. I know that the Ingalls, said that they used to have that kind of thing with Nassim Hamed. He would go from being a completely dedicated trainer to when he started to believe his own hype and what have you, he'd come rolling up at the Ingalls household at 11 o'clock at night, banging on the door, demanding to be trained at that time, that's just not the way you do it, is it? It's just not. It's ludicrous. It's ludicrous, and anybody in any walk of life, however successful they may get, must always keep 2 feet on the ground. The moment your feet start moving off the ground is when trouble arises, and I think that was the case with Chavez Jr. because I'm not even convinced his feet are on the ground in the first place.
Yeah, it's if his feet are on the ground, his head's certainly in the clouds.
Yeah.
And just in closing, there was another big fight. Paul Salgado, our man in Canada, has covered it for us. Adonis Stevenson made light work, really, of Tavoris Cloud. Tony Bellew was an interested spectator ringside. We swapped some messages on Monday night, actually, Bellew and myself. No, Tuesday night. And he said Stevenson wasn't even looking at him, didn't really acknowledge him over there. And he's ready for Stevenson. But Stevenson seems to be on a bit of a collision course with this Sergey Kovalev, doesn't he? It seems to be a fight that everyone's talking about, and people are taking Bellew for granted a little bit. Do you think that?
Yeah, of course they are. I mean, it's Bellew's mandatory. He's got to get the next shot, Stevenson, I believe, if Stevenson wants to keep hold of his belt. Stevenson, I thought, looked excellent against Tavoris Cloud. It was a huge result, dominating him like he did, and then stopping him, forcing the stoppage. Although Cloud, to me, completely different fighter to what he was a few years ago, and I think I spoke about it with John last week, but as he came up, I think that feeling that he wasn't this invincible destroyer slowly was fed to him as he made his way up the world-class ranks, and I think it was confirmed against Bernard Hopkins. And I think when you started out with that mentality of being invincible and being indestructible, when you suddenly realise that you're a human being after all and you're beaten, you don't get that back, and you're never the same fighter. We've seen that so many times, and I think that's what's happened with Tavoris Cloud. I think his deterioration is as much mental as it is physical.
Do you know what? I think you touched upon Hopkins. I honestly think Hopkins might erect Cloud, another fighter that has just got into a fighter's head and basically ruined him. I think he did something similar with Pascal. He did it with Trinidad. Did it with Kelly Pavlik. None of these guys have been the same since.
No, but I don't think Cloud was that same fighter before. You can make the argument that all those others were coming off impressive performances. I think that it was a slow deterioration with Cloud. Yeah,
fair enough. There is actually something I do want to just put to you in closing. Very interesting bit of business, and I use the word interesting quite liberally, by Matchroom this week. Darren Barker's going on the road to fight Felix Sturm in Stuttgart on December 7th. it's not often a fighter works so hard to get a world title and then instantly goes right back out on the road to defend the title. Normally you think of a bit of a homecoming, you think of a big money fight back in the UK, you think, a fight with Macklin could do big business over here, although I know he's got an HBO date before the end of the year. Are you surprised by Darren Barker, and if you were promoting him, what would you have advised him?
I can only imagine that Darren Barker is getting paid handsomely, and I think we know that he's going to get a career high payday for this. But it screams danger for me. I know there's a rematch clause. I think he should have had a homecoming fight after he won the title abroad. He deserved to fight to defend his title at home. We've seen. Thing is, Germany isn't quite. I think we've seen fair results there. We've seen some decisions go. We've seen decisions go against Sturm and Sebastian Sylvester, for example, in recent years. So it's not quite. You don't have to go there and just think, well, I've got to stop him, otherwise I won't get the decision. However, Darren Barker must be aware of the fact that Martin Murray and Matthew Macklin have gone over to Germany against Felix Sturm and lost, or didn't get the decisions that they felt they deserved. It's a risky business. It's a risky business for Darren Barker, and after how hard he has worked for it, I hope he doesn't stumble. At this point.
I think you've mentioned a key thing. I think obviously the method behind the madness is financial, and I also think that those fights you mentioned with Sturm and Macklin and Murray have come at the end of a very hard career for Felix Sturm, someone who's always been in shape but who's done things the hard way, and been in a lot of good hard fights. Sure, he's had some easier ones along the way as well with that WBA reign in Germany, but he has been in some tough fights, and I think those Macklin fights and Murray fights would have taken a lot out of him, and I think perhaps there's that aspect now with the loss to Daniel Geale, and obviously he had a very, very hard fight with Sam Solomon. I think Sturm might be ready for the taking, and I think that's maybe one of the things that they see is that Sturm has been a real force in Germany, but that force was getting beaten down and battered down a couple of years ago, and the decline there has set in too.
Yeah, I'll tell you that. Yeah, completely. I think if he'd have fought Sturm over here, and Sturm was making noises. I think he spoke to John Denon a few weeks ago, and said that he'd happily come over here and fight Darren Barker. I would make Barker a pretty clear favourite for all those reasons that you've just mentioned against Felix Sturm if the fight was happening in this country. Not saying that I won't pick Barker to retain his title, but there's elements of danger there that were avoidable.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'd have to agree. It's a heck of a job. One thing that Barker did say isn't just about the money, but that he actually wants to emulate and get the respect that Carl Froch has got from being on the road and being a fighting champion. And obviously, if he goes over to Germany and pulls this off in his first defence, then he's going to get all the credit in the world, and
exactly,
he'll merit it. But then, like you say, it's a gamble. It's playing with fire, as fighters do. But often we criticise them for not taking the chances, so it's hard to criticise them when they do take the chance.
Oh yeah. No, it's not criticism again with Darren Barker. It's certainly admiration for that self-belief.
Where are you watching the fight Saturday night then, Matt? There's some big things on. We've got Cotto, we've got Klitschko, we've got Joshua and Quigg. Where are you going to be?
I'm going to be at home, I think, for Klitschko. Joshua and Quigg, I'm not sure. And Cotto at home.
Okay. Busy weekend ahead, so there's going to be plenty of talking points for us next week. We might even have a special guest with us next week, which would be nice. We are waiting on confirmation. Fingers crossed. If not, it's just going to be me and Matt back here, same time next week.